In this video, we are going to talk about the history of the web. Let's get to it. Now, this is the second to last video to sum up the whole series, and the last one is actually going to come out this Halloween, so stay tuned for that video. Every single video is actually leading up to that video right there. Now let's actually talk a little bit about the web, and that's how you're viewing this video and also how we have a lot of stuff that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. But you can't really talk about the web without talking about the internet. And the internet actually came before the web, and they're actually two different things. So essentially, the internet is just a network of information and information exchange. And technically, we do have something like the internet before we had the internet, before it was invented, but it wasn't as efficient up until the internet was really flushed out and fully implemented. Now, information exchange before the internet, you often would use something like letters or telephones or Morse code or telegrams to communicate to other people through a huge distance of land, right? And if you want to know something, you have to go look it up in an encyclopedia or visit the library to know what a thing is or what a word means, things like that. And encyclopedias now are all virtual now. Like, no one actually owns an encyclopedia no more. But encyclopedias used to be a bunch of editions from A to Z of different types of information that is provided for you. And it's updated yearly with some encyclopedia publishers, and that's how people get their information during the time. You can also exchange information in person, but that's actually not as efficient because you can't really talk to someone unless you travel to them. And also, if you have any news back then were divided within newspapers or posters or word to mouth and things like that. That's how people got their news, is with these types of information exchange back then. And this doesn't even go through relatively recently too. Even further back then, further where Julius Caesar or when the Romans or Egyptians or any other of those back then, they all use some sort of information exchange, like writing stuff in hieroglyphics or writing stuff on parchment or having pigeons relay information during the world wars. And even back in the caveman days, people still have information exchange with some sticks or some cave drawings. That's still kind of the precursor of information exchange. And it wasn't really perfected up until the history of the internet. And the history of the internet really revolutionized how we exchange information. And the idea was proposed and thought of way before it was actually implemented. But when it was then implemented, it was then implemented in the 1950s. That's when governments and military needed to have information exchange to kind of make sure all of the troops and all the information are all correct. Because during something like research or something like a military operation, they need the information as fast as possible. They can't just wait for a letter to come to them at every single moment when they're in the heat of battle, right? So they actually implemented something in the 1950s and have it proposed. And it wasn't until in the 1969 it was finally implemented. And it was implemented for researchers and the government to exchange information. And it was shared through a wide area. It wasn't as worldwide, but it was in a wide enough area that spans across a few couple states. And the first nodes, or the first node of the network, were actually built in UCLA, or the University of California in Los Angeles, and also in Stanford as well. And they were able to communicate and exchange information between the two schools. Later on that year, the University of Utah, as well as the University of California at Santa Barbara, also got added to the list. And within that year, not only were they able to exchange information from school to school, they were able to do it in a way where they were spreading information across the states. And with this, they expanded to other universities and other government and research facilities that needed to be part of this network, because you can only be part of this network if you had these individual nodes that are close to you, and that's how you become that network. Later on, they have nodes expanding all the way up to Hawaii, which is across the ocean. and also in other research facilities around the states, and eventually slowly they've gone around the world. But that still poses a problem with information exchange, because if you think about it, if you need something and the only place that you have it is within this network, you have to be part of the network to have it. And also, you have to be lucky enough that you were near some of these nodes, some of these networks. Like you have to be by California or by the University of Utah or Hawaii. That way you can access the same information that they are able to access. Or else you're still doing those traditional ways of sending letters or having newspapers and things like that. You are still having that issue that isn't really versatile as it should be. Now, this is where the World Wide Web comes into play. In 1989, someone named Tim Berners-Lee invented a way for information to be shared not only in small nodes, but all over the world. And that is a revolutionary idea because you're not having to be in a sort of network. You can be anywhere on the world and you can still access those same type of information. And that really helps around a lot, including military, government, and also other researchers and researching ideas that can be transmitted across worldwide. And that is something that he brought to the table. And it was proposed at first, and it wasn't really a huge priority. They didn't seem a big difference or a huge revolutionary idea at first, like all ideas, right? But with this idea, it slowly implemented and evolved into what we know as the World Wide Web today. And what he brought to the table at the very beginning of the World Wide Web was the first hypertext transfer protocol, a new language called hypertext markup language, the first ever web browser as well as a web editor, and a HTTP server software, the first ever web server, and the first ever web pages that kind of tells you the story and what he wants to do with these types of tools. Those were the first ever kind of websites and web ideas that he brought to the table. And that what really down the line revolutionized the website industry. This is what started off, is these first ever things right here that really start off and kicked off the World Wide Web. And now, not only do we have a transfer of information, we also have other things that we have through the World Wide Web, and we can exchange it anywhere inside of the world. We don't have to be part of a network anymore. We can be outside of the network and still have access to the same exact information as other people can. And obviously there are some things such as like government or military and research stuff that is inside of lock and key, and that's just a different type of use for the World Wide Web. You can have your own pockets or your own network still in the World Wide Web, and you can still save that and share it wherever it is you need to. Now, at first, at the very beginning, it's just a bunch of websites, and you don't have access to a internet unless you have a huge computer, right? And computers aren't as versatile as it is right now. Nowadays, a computer can fit in your pocket. But back then, computers are actually huge. They're actually the size of buildings. They take up a couple floors, a couple of buildings. And that's what you need to connect to the network. You need to connect to the internet. And that's not really ideal for the common day household to have a whole building just for a computer. And in most cases, most households did it, right? Or they didn't have a huge computer that they're able to work with. So only access from government or research or universities have access to the internet, only has access to a huge computer that can support the internet and be able to access the internet. So at first, not a lot of people were using it. It's only those people that need to use it, they were able to use it. But then it came into a boom. And this is a boom where the industry kind of took off. This is where things kind of went from 0 to 100 real quick. Because not only did the access change, more and more people were starting to use and starting to change the industry. And it first started off with a commercialized computer. Computers were then commercialized, so not only do the rich of the rich or the people that need it can have a computer, now anyone can be able to have a computer. So leading industries such as HP, Dell, Apple, Microsoft, other huge tech companies, they all develop a commercialized computer. That way they can all have access to certain tools. And that was kind of a race between all those big tech giants to have something for the average day household to have a computer. And from there, it then kicked off again. Then people wanted to think about portable computers. That's where the ideas of laptop comes in. And maybe implementing it within a cell phone and in a smartphone, and later on inside of your car, or inside of your appliances and cameras and so many other things, they were then implemented the computer. And not only that, some of these items were then have access to the internet and then has access to Wi-Fi and the World Wide Web. So that's what really revolutionized the use of the internet, is what the ideas and evolutions of the computers. Not only that, a lot of businesses saw a huge potential with the internet, with the World Wide Web. With the World Wide Web, you can span your whole entire service or your whole entire idea throughout the whole entire world. And that is a really good marketing strategy for most businesses, if not all businesses. So some of the businesses, they thought that the World Wide Web as a place for you to have another marketplace that they can do their business in. They are able to share services and products, such as store or trades or stocks or even information and entertainment, as well as video games on the World Wide Web. That all started off on the internet for them to kick off and also expand their own businesses. That also contributed to the big boom as well. And as more businesses hopped on, more web pages popped up as well. Things such as advertisement for some of the products and some providers like YouTube and later on Netflix and all these other care providers that you can do all on the internet itself. And you can have access to them through the World Wide Web. The ideas that people thought of is really bringing in creativity of how they can utilize the World Wide Web. And this gives you a wider reach for everyone throughout the whole entire corners of the earth, and it spans across different languages and different backgrounds. You can spread your information out now through the World Wide Web. And there's basically now a website for almost anything. You can think of it, there's probably a website for it. And if not, you can always create a website for it. And that's where the industry really boomed, is with this creativity, with this reach, with all of these ideas coming inside of it to kind of change for what it was to what it is currently right now. And that's awesome, that's amazing. Eventually, the World Wide Web will later on evolve into something more in the future. It can kind of grow into something that we can have a wider access into more information and more information reach. Because if you really think about it, there are some countries and are some places that don't have access to internet, or much of less running water or electricity. So they don't have access to the internet. But later on, maybe there's a way where you can make computers more affordable, or you can have the internet more affordable, things like that. That's more of the evolution that could come to be. And not only that, maybe later on, further down the years, we can communicate in between planets and between universes with the World Wide Web. You can have websites coming from Mars or Jupiter or Saturn, all coming towards the moon or something crazy like that. And that's where the evolution is projected to be, is that everything that is going to happen later on can be contributed with the internet and also the World Wide Web. We can have communications in different languages. Why not alien languages as well, with other lives inside of our universe? That's what's coming up with the evolution. And it doesn't start from pioneers back then. It actually starts off with ideas that you have right now, with really cool, innovative ideas that can really pioneer what the World Wide Web is into something that can really be super cool in the future. And that is the wicked history of the World Wide Web. If you like it, please subscribe and hit the like button below, and I will see you in the next video. See ya.